During World War II, thousands of Japanese soldiers believed surrender meant certain death and unimaginable cruelty. Yet when they stepped behind American barbed wire, they encountered something that defied every rumor, every warning, every fear showers with endless hot water. What began as suspicion and terror soon became one of the most unforgettable revelations of their captivity. Before we dive into this extraordinary story, let us know in the comments where you're watching from today. And if you enjoy uncovering hidden chapters of history, make sure to hit subscribe so you never miss the stories that change the way we see the past. The first weeks inside the camp unfolded like a strange dream, silent, tense, and filled with cautious glances as hundreds of Japanese prisoners of war shuffled past barbed wire gates under the watchful eyes of American guards. Their uniforms were ragged, stiff with layers of sweat and dust from endless marches through tropical heat, their bodies beaten down by months of hunger, exhaustion, and surrender. Yet none of that prepared them for what they would encounter beyond those gates, an encounter that would shake their expectations of captivity. After the monotony of registration, medical inspections, and the handing out of basic supplies, the prisoners were herded into a cavernous wooden hall, its ceiling strung with unfamiliar metal pipes. They paused, unsettled. This was no hut or barracks like those they had known in the Pacific. Instead, rows of nozzles jutted downward, each with drains at the floor beneath an alien sight that made them stop mid. With clip deficiency, the guards ordered them to strip, their gestures sharp and impatient. At first, confusion rippled through the crowd. During the war, Japanese soldiers rarely bathed in any organized way, sometimes plunging into rivers, sometimes rinsing with seawater, but always constrained by shortages. Soap had been a precious luxury. Now, in the custody of their sworn enemy, they were being directed toward what seemed like a ritual of cleansing. Some clutched their belongings as if bracing for deception. Whispers spread of stories told by their officers that the Americans were ruthless, that surrender meant degradation, that prisoners would be treated like animals. As steam curled from the pipes above, unease mounted. The guards barked again, louder this time. Shoes, belts, tunics, all had to be shed. Reluctantly, buttons were undone and clothes fell to the floor. Scarred bodies, marked by the jungles of Guadalcanal and Saipan, stood exposed, vulnerable under the gaze of strangers. Soap was thrust into their hands, its coarse surface unfamiliar. Then, with a sharp hiss, water burst forth. Hot streams poured from overhead, striking their skin with a force that made many recoil. For an instant, they braced for agony. But the sting was not pain, it was warmth. The heat washed down their backs and shoulders, carrying away sweat, dirt, and fear in its flow. A stunned calm overtook them. Eyes closed, breaths slowed, and the drains filled with a murky residue of months of hardship. Slowly, suspicion gave way to wonder. For the first time in years, they felt clean. On the islands, water had been rationed, disease spread unchecked, and lice infested their uniforms. Yet here, in enemy hands, they stood under endless streams of hot water, free from the bark of their own officers, free from ration lines and scarcity. When they stepped out, towels awaited them, thick, soft, and freshly folded. Many touched the fabric as though it were some relic from a distant, forgotten world. They dried themselves clumsily, still half believing it might be a trick. For the Americans, it was nothing more than procedure. For the Japanese, it was nothing short of revelation. As they shuffled out with damp hair and flushed skin, murmurs rippled through the ranks, no longer the whispers of dread, but astonished disbelief. Could their captors truly be offering comfort rather than cruelty? That first shower lingered in their minds long after, not as a humiliation but as a challenge to everything they had been told. The encounter with soap and hot water became more than hygiene, it became a symbol of something larger. The unsettling realization that captivity might not strip them of dignity, but instead offer an unexpected glimpse into another civilization's way of life. When the session ended and they returned to their barracks, silence pressed heavily over the room. Some sat on benches clutching their uniforms, others rubbed their heads with thick towels, still unsure if they had been granted a kindness or lured into a subtle game. None dared to speak aloud, as though naming the experience might shatter the fragile truth they had just witnessed, that even in defeat, the world could still surprise them. Deep inside, unease still gnawed at the prisoners. They had been told countless times that falling into American hands meant dishonor, torture, and certain death. Before every battle, officers had drilled into them visions of brutal camps, where starvation and abuse would be their only future. Yet here they stood, their first command from the enemy being not punishment, but a bath with soap and hot water. Too many, it felt suspicious, too clean, too civilized, almost staged. One prisoner, a naval mechanic from Yokosuka, remembered how Allied propaganda leaflets had once shown smiling captives receiving food and rest. He had scoffed at those papers, convinced they were lies meant to weaken Japanese resolve. Now, standing clean for the first time in months, those images came rushing back, and with them a chilling thought: what if they weren't lies at all? But just as quickly, a darker fear crept in. What if the showers were not about cleanliness? Murmurs spread of gas chambers, half-formed stories of German camps in Europe, twisting into whispers of hidden cruelty. Guards noticed hesitation at the doorways. Their orders barked again and again, translators assuring the men that bathing was nothing more than hygiene. Still, suspicion lingered. Some prisoners feared the soap was poisoned. Others believed the heat of the water masked something sinister. A few refused to wash fully, wetting only their arms and faces before stepping away. For Japanese soldiers, bathing once carried deep cultural meaning: ritual purification in hot springs, communal bonds in shared baths. But the war had stripped away that tradition. Months of dirt, lice, and infection had become their reality. Now, inside the camp, the showers were industrial rows of pipes and drains, cold in design, practical for Americans but alien to the Japanese. It felt mechanical, stripped of spirit, efficient yet unsettling. For days, hushed conversations swirled through the barracks. Why waste hot water on captives? Why provide soap and towels when it would have been easier to leave them filthy? Was it kindness or some cunning strategy to break them with comfort? Theories multiplied. Some believed it was control through softness. Others whispered of chemicals in the water. Fear clung to them, reinforced by memories of their officers' warnings. And yet, no punishment came. No hidden cruelty revealed itself. They returned each night to their bunks alive, cleaner than before. Slowly, suspicion began to erode, replaced by a reluctant curiosity. The Americans repeated the process daily, marching the men to the shower hole, handing out soap wrapped in paper that reeked of strange chemicals, towels stamped with military marks, and still nothing sinister followed. What kind of enemy cared whether their captives smelled clean or carried fewer lice? For men raised to believe surrender was worse than death, the question was as unsettling as the hot water itself. The routine soon became part of camp life: mechanical, imposed, yet impossible to ignore. Strip, step under the streams, wash, dry, and dress. The rhythm became as strict as roll call. Days turned into weeks, and the prisoners began to realize this was no passing novelty but a rule of life inside the camp. Cleanliness was enforced with the same discipline as curfews and inspections. Through halting translations and pointed gestures, American guards insisted that every man scrub from head to toe. Soap worked into hair, feet, and the folds of the body. Lice checks followed, with medics pulling at seams and shaking out bedding. Powder dusted over skin and clothing. Clean undergarments issued like rations. For the first time, many Japanese soldiers understood that to the Americans, hygiene was as vital as food or ammunition. In enemies' discipline aimed not at humiliation, but at health. Yet the experience carried a sting of contradiction. Stripped and lined up, they felt like schoolboys forced to bathe on command. Their individuality pressed away. But soon, some could not deny the results. A corporal who had endured Guadalcanal, where weeks passed with only muddy streams for bathing, felt the sores on his legs heal, his cough ease, his body recover in ways he had not thought possible. Pride fought with relief. At first, language confused everything. Some men ignored, shouted orders, scrubbing only faces or arms, but guards shoved them back under the spray until the soap foamed properly. What seemed degrading in the moment proved undeniable when uniforms returned, laundered. Blankets carried the faint scent of detergent instead of mildew, and barracks no longer stank of sweat and sickness. Gradually, habit replaced suspicion. They lined up without protest, dried themselves carefully, folded towels as instructed, even comparing which soap lathered best. These small conversations filled hours otherwise heavy with silence. Hygiene, once resented, became a shared ritual that knit them together. What unsettled them most was the realization that their captors expected dignity, even in captivity. The Japanese army had drilled the opposite lesson, that comfort was weakness, filth was endurance, and suffering was proof of honor. Now, under foreign command, they were shown another vision of discipline, that to be clean was to be strong. The clash gnawed at their beliefs, but planted reluctant seeds of respect. The first time hot water rained from the nozzles, many had flinched as though burned, only to find a steady warmth that seemed almost indulgent. For men accustomed to rinsing with cold rivers or dabbing sweat with rags, the sensation was a shock of luxury. Steam curled above them, softening the harsh wooden hole, while the foreign-smelling soap foamed thick and rinsed clean. Some marveled at the feel, remembering how on Lonely Island campaigns a few heated cans of water shared among dozens had been considered a blessing. Here, in enemy hands, the very thing denied them in war warmth. Cleanliness, relief was given freely, reshaping their idea of what captivity could mean. Here, each man stepped beneath his own stream of heat, a private cascade that felt almost unending. It wasn't just washing, it was stepping into another world. When thick cotton towels followed, the shock deepened. Unlike the ragged cloths they once shared in Japanese barracks, these were soft, absorbent, and carried the faint, sharp scent of detergent. Pressing the towels to their faces, prisoners felt pores open, skin refreshed, the sticky film of months in the tropics finally stripped away. The sensation stirred memories, long buried mothers, drawing hot baths back home, childhood visits, 2 communal bathhouses, moments of humanity drowned out by years of war. Yet here, in the strange order of captivity, those memories resurfaced. To the Americans, this was routine, no more sentimental than issuing rations. But for the prisoners, it was a revelation. The irony stung. They had expected cruelty, but instead received comforts their own army had denied. Some saw it as weakness, indulgence that dishonored a soldier's endurance, while others, quietly grateful, let the water soothe their scars and aching limbs. Over time, they learned what their commanders had never taught, that hot water eased pain, that soap healed sores, that a clean barracks air could mean fewer infections. Hair softened, coughs diminished, and the heavy stench of men packed together faded. The paradox gnawed at them. How could the enemy provide a dignity their own leaders had scorned? The showers revealed not just abundance, but a system so efficient it extended comfort even to captives. Standing under those streams, many felt a pang of envy, even shame, at the stark contrast. At night, when lamps dimmed and bodies rested in rows, the whispers were no longer about guns or campaigns, but about soap, towels, and the marvel of hot water. It was a strange, almost embarrassing topic, yet impossible to ignore. In the Japanese army, filth was a badge of toughness, bathing, an indulgence reserved for chance. Soldiers went weeks without washing, their skin caked in grime, uniforms crusted with salt, lice gnawing through seams. Complaining was weakness. Now, under American rule, cleanliness was not a privilege but a law of discipline. One former sergeant remembered bitterly how 30 men in New Guinea once shared a single rusted basin, rinsing only their faces and hands. That memory clashed cruelly with the reality of endless hot showers in captivity. Daily reminder that the world they fought against held a different kind of power. One measured not just in weapons, but in the quiet strength of order and care. Another man whispered bitterly that back in Manchuria, frostbite had crippled his regiment, not only from the cold, but from wearing the same filthy socks for months. Disease had ravaged entire units more ruthlessly than enemy fire. Now, in America, every captive was ordered to scrub his feet daily, and medics bent down to inspect toes and heels, as though the men were patients, not prisoners. The irony was cutting. Pride stung, yet bodies told a different story. Faded, lice disappeared, ulcers healed, stomachs once plagued by parasites calmed under the rhythm of soap and clean clothes. Slowly, men began to see the connection. Hygiene was not weakness, it was strength, a weapon sharper than stubborn endurance. The realization stirred something deeper than health. It recalled their homeland, the onsen baths in misty mountains, the wooden tubs filled by mothers heating water at dusk, the communal cleansing that once bound families and villages together. War had stripped it away, turning men into creatures who endured filth as proof of honor. Now, paradoxically, the enemy had given it back. Some prisoners spoke with longing of home. Others grew quiet with shame that it was not Japan but America restoring this dignity. The guards, brisk and unsentimental, never grasped the weight of what they enforced. To them, showers were routine, regulations against disease. To the men behind wire fences, lying awake at night, it was a revelation. Strength was not in ignoring illness, but in preventing it. If the Americans cared this much for captives, how much more must they provide for their own? The thought unsettled them. Weeks became months, and what had once felt like humiliation settled into expectation. Wake up, roll call, meals, the march to the showers, an order of life, now carved into the camp. Men no longer resisted. They walked in lines with soap in hand, towels slung over shoulders, as though it had always been this way. And with the change came dignity. Laundered uniforms no longer reeked of decay. Faces reflected in rain puddles seemed less gaunt. Wounds healed. Skin lost its angry sores. Even the coughs and constant scratching of lice faded into silence. Guards smirked that the Japanese looked more orderly now than when they first arrived, a comment that embarrassed some but could not be denied. Cleanliness became more than survival. It became proof they were not yet reduced to shadows of men. Stronger bodies meant steadier spirits. Some began to fold towels with care, to polish boots with pride, to sweep barracks floors with deliberate order. In small ways, routine had restored a fragment of the soldiers they had once been. It reminded many of the quiet rituals back home, of mothers scrubbing wooden tubs, and the orderliness of Japanese households where cleanliness was as much tradition as duty. They realized then that stepping into the showers was not surrender to the enemy, was reclaiming pieces of themselves buried under mud, sweat, and years of war. Conversations shifted. Men who had once sat silent now exchanged remarks about the strangeness of feeling healthy in captivity, about the irony that their bodies thrived more here than on the battlefield. American medics, brisk and unsentimental, logged the evidence: fewer cases of dysentery, fewer lice infestations, fewer deaths. To them, it was statistics, proof the system worked. To the Japanese, it was revelation. Hygiene here was not indulgence but discipline, not privilege but duty. The lesson unsettled them, for it clashed with the ethos of their own army, where enduring filth was proof of toughness. Here, the opposite was true. Cleanliness was strength. Suspicion faded. No one whispered any more about poison in the soap, or hidden cruelty in the pipes. Instead, they began to anticipate the ritual, some even craving it. A few lingered under the streams longer than allowed, eyes shut, letting the water wash not only grime but the weight of defeat from their shoulders. Slowly, hygiene became more than a rule. It was dignity restored, a reminder of their humanity, behind barbed wire. By the time autumn winds swept across the camp, the conversations had transformed. No longer did men whisper about hidden traps. Now, they laughed at their first fears, trading stories of their awkward entry into the showers. A stern officer admitted he once thought the steam was a trap meant to kill them. Others chuckled, confessing they had felt the same. Younger men compared the showers to the grand public bathhouses of Tokyo, their words stirring nostalgia-tiled floors, wooden buckets, neighbors gathered in warmth. Ironically, it was in enemy hands that those memories returned. Yet what unsettled them most was not the ritual itself, but the truth it revealed about America. If this nation could provide endless hot water for its captives, what luxuries did it give its own soldiers? If soap and towels were routine here, what must daily life look like in their barracks back home? The thought gnawed at them, especially as they remembered comrades who had died from infected wounds left unwashed. Soldiers tormented by lice, men wasted not by bullets but by filth and disease. To admit even quietly that hygiene might be one of America's hidden strengths was a bitter pill. Around mess tables, over rations of bread, beans and potatoes, talk grew bolder. Some confessed they had once believed Americans to be brutes. Now they saw them as methodical, even orderly, in something as mundane as bathing. Others took the thought further, suggesting that this was not just camp procedure, but a reflection of a civilization built on abundance and efficiency, one with the resources to extend dignity even to its enemies. Such truths were hard to swallow. Pride still burned in many hearts, and the thought that America might stand superior stung like salt in a wound. Yet their healed skin, their steady breath, their restored health could not be denied. Some muttered bitterly that these comforts were traps, designed to soften the steel of Japanese endurance. Others, though, felt something different, stirring within them, reluctant respect. They began to see the showers not merely as acts of hygiene, but as windows into a larger truth, the industrial power, the boundless resources, and the very different philosophy that drove their captors. In hushed tones, a few even admitted that these moments had reshaped their vision of the world beyond the barbed wire. What had once been feared as an instrument of cruelty had become a place of revelation. The showers were no longer about soap and water. They symbolized the contrast between two civilizations. America's strength lay not only in guns or ships, but in systems of life so advanced that even prisoners of war were swept into their order. Years later, when men returned to Japan after surrender, captivity weighed heavily on their memories. Shame, relief, confusion interwoven into every recollection. Yet one image shone with startling clarity: the showers. Veterans who had marched jungles, fought ambushes, and braved bombardments recalled most vividly the sensation of hot water streaming from overhead pipes, the strange smell of soap, the discipline of enforced cleanliness that first unnerved and then transformed them. Some spoke haltingly to their families, describing with awkward honesty how the Americans had insisted on daily hygiene. Mothers and wives listened in disbelief. How could an enemy offer such care? Others kept silent, unable to admit that captivity had given them a comfort their own army had not. Still, in private, many acknowledged that the endless hot water revealed something profound, a civilization modern, abundant, and organized in ways Japan had not matched during the war. The memory was not sentimental. Showers had begun as humiliation, even fear, but over time disease ebbed, wounds healed, lice vanished, and the lesson crystallized: cleanliness was strength, health was a weapon. America wielded it quietly, yet with devastating effectiveness. Years later, in barracks conversations after repatriation, some admitted this was the greatest lesson they carried home: not about tactics or battlefields, but about the silent power of modern standards. Historians who interviewed them decades later noted how often showers surfaced in their testimonies. Food rations and work details varied from camp to camp, but the routine of hygiene had been universal, leaving an imprint deeper than bread or cigarettes. Men could endure hunger. They expected it, but to be marched into rooms of steaming water, to be handed soap and towels, it was unforgettable, precisely because it was so alien to their wartime lives. In the end, it symbolized not indulgence but a worldview, one where even enemies were treated as human beings who must remain clean, and the impact lingered long after. Some former prisoners, once home, carried the habits with them, bathing more regularly, insisting their children learn that hygiene was not weakness but discipline. For them, the showers were never just routine. They were revelations, bittersweet, reminders of defeat and survival, of dignity glimpsed in the most unlikely place. In their memories, the paradox remained that in the moment of greatest humiliation, they had also encountered a glimpse of modernity they could never forget. In the end, it wasn't only about soap or hot water. 4 men stripped of weapons, freedom, and pride. The showers became a symbol of something greater: dignity restored, humanity rediscovered in the hands of an enemy they had once been taught to despise. Long after the war ended, many carried that memory home, teaching their children that true strength is found not in filth or suffering, but in the discipline of care. What do you think this story reveals about the hidden power of compassion in times of war? Share your thoughts below, and if this story moved you, don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more untold histories.